Okay, so here we are on October the 4th, 2021. Meeting of, by Zoom, meeting of the first Monday group. And what I hope to do is today is spend a good deal of time around the concept of shame. How it evolved as a protective, life protective response wired in affect in the central nervous system, how it got elevated to a exaggerated level of sensitivity early in the life of our species, how that early sensitivity got transmitted through the ages, and what kind of trouble it's causing now, and what we might be able to do about it in ourselves and in the society that we're in. So I'm going to start out actually by reading relevant portions from Evolution Diverted, because I don't think I can say it better than I wrote it. Well, anyway.
Mike, will you tell us where you're reading from so we can follow along?
Yes. So I'm going to start with page 188. And I think in the earlier edition, the first edition of Evolution Diverted, the pagination should be the same. It shouldn't be any different. I'm going to start with page 188. And in this section, I'd already discussed the confusion that developed from us not knowing who we were at this time, seeing two very different parent species and having a confused consciousness and unable to integrate the two other forms of consciousness that were in ourselves from the start. Talked about that. Also talked about the universal trauma state that we fell into through our endless involvement in the forever war of the Anunnaki nobles, and how that primed our threat response system to a high level of activity and leaving us essentially a traumatized species, at least the civilized portion of humanity. Now, there's another neural system that we're going to get into. And also, like the threat response system, it evolved to protect us and winds up doing us great harm. With the rise of the mammals, the emotions appeared. Emotions have biological cores, 9 innate neural responses called affects, centered in the brain's limbic system. The affects assist survival by selecting the most relevant data from the incoming flood of sensations, which would otherwise overwhelm consciousness because we just way too much that we could to process, and highlighting the most critical information. That's one of the main functions of the affects. The affect fear fixes attention, for example, on the bear glimpsed through the trees. The affect distress facilitates a reaction, for example, to the flame beginning to touch the hand. The affect enjoyment enhances awareness of a gentle stroke on the shoulder, for example. By making selected perceptions prominent, the affects focus us on what's most significant. They also produce bodily and facial displays, rapidly transmitting information about the immediate environment between group members. another aspect of their survival value. Now, when a significant event occurs, like the bear appears, or the skin gets warm, or the shoulder is stroked, an affect is engaged, and a script is created at that time. And in the script, the affect, the circumstances, and the meaning are all recorded. The script becomes a more or less permanent cognition. And it speeds responses to similar episodes in the future, because their evaluation will benefit from a kind of a head start, having had the script recorded. Now, an emotion combines three elements: the affect, the bodily feelings connected with it, and the script from past events, and those can be recent ones or remote ones. So a few neural patterns, these 9 affects, most of them are negative, like fear, like distress, like disgust. Most of them are protective against things that are dangerous and threatening. These few neural patterns are the cores of a vast range of states, the emotions. An affect is physiologic. The emotion it engenders is, in addition, biographic. When an affect is engaged, it can potentially recruit any of the scripts with which it is linked from the past. So the trouble can enter the scene in the present if the script recruited is not fully appropriate to present circumstances, and this often occurs. The affect of shame claims the focus of our concern because of its role in the human tragedy. The term shame refers to a neurophysiologic pattern, not the state of feeling ashamed for having done something, because being ashamed is one of many, many emotions that are based in the affect of shame. It's an auxiliary act. It arises only when one of the positive affects, enjoyment and interest, are suddenly interrupted. We'll get into that, but the interruption of having a good, being in a good state, can occur either by an event, kids listening to music in his room, and the parent swings the door open and says, "Shut that thing down." Okay, that's an environmental interruption of enjoyment and interest. Okay, but it can also be through a script that comes into your mind and interferes with your enjoyment of what you're doing, what you're into. In subjectively, shame is actually very aversive. Bodily sensations, including a cringing feeling, a muscle weakness, loss of tone, particularly in the neck. It is really quite unpleasant. And this makes evolutionary sense. And here's why as an affect, and it may have actually been one of the last ones to evolve. The positive affects have momentum. Linda, yes.
I'm sorry, Mike. There's some kind of, I think we all need to be muted. I'm getting so much interference. I'm getting about half of what you're saying. Could we all mute ourselves? There's something coming.
I'll mute everybody.
Okay.
I won't.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't know where it was coming from. Okay. Do you want to be muted? Okay, you are muted. All right. Okay, so thanks. Thanks, Linda. Okay, so it makes evolutionary sense. When we're feeling good, we like to keep feeling good. And so if circumstances suddenly make a positive affect inappropriate, It needs to be extinguished quickly lest there be a delay in taking action. You might stay so engaged with the pleasure of lunch and companionship in a sunny clearing that we fail for a moment to respond to the glimpse of the bear in the trees. And then we become his lunch. So shame's aversive feelings make sure that pleasure is shut down quickly, facilitating a fitting response to the changed reality. With the infinity of ways positive affects can be interrupted, the range of scripts associated with shame is huge. The shame reaction can result in any of these emotions. And here's quite a list. Embarrassed, ashamed, hurt, rejected, unattractive, inadequate, unworthy, stupid, worthless, hopeless, doomed, humiliated, unlovable, sad, mortified, despairing, lonely, shy, frustrated, inferior, alienated, any of those. They're all, depending on the script that gets connected with the affect, could produce any combination of those feelings. Though it evolved to alert us and then quickly die out, which is what all the affects are structured to do. It can get caught up with the script it has roused and form a continuous loop, making the emotion persist. Now, if a relatively benign event recruits a potent yet poorly matched script from the past, this affect can lead to some real difficulty. Scripts have power in the system of affects and emotions because their function is mostly unconscious. In fact, for emotions to function efficiently, scripts need to be mostly out of awareness. The time required for thinking could be disastrous. Imagine if you had to think about it before hitting the brake in a road emergency. Maybe I don't need this light. Let me check this. Sorry, excuse me. Is that better? Maybe. No, sorry. Evolution chose to err on the side of safety, speed of a reaction over a guarantee of its appropriateness. The trouble is that a script may determine how one feels and therefore how one acts without any realization of what has just happened within. We may respond with negative emotion and unwarranted behavior more on the basis of a recruited script than on present reality. The psychotherapies that involve making the unconscious conscious cultivate awareness of scripts that operate insidiously. Largely through the operation of unconscious scripts, shame wreaks havoc in people and societies. All forms of addiction are attempts to escape intolerable levels of the shame emotions. Narcissism, a toxic form of pride, is a reaction to emotions based in shame and fear. When shame emotions sustained by scripts become unbearable, some people get angry to escape their feelings of weakness. Attacking others to keep from feeling shame takes many forms, from road rage to racism. In some people, the escape from shame leads to hostility against the self, that is, depression. Poorly managed shame is an unrecognized causal factor in many psychological conditions and interpersonal problems. Destructive ways of defending against shame emotions get embedded in societies and passed on through generations. There are cultures drenched in misogyny, xenophobia, alcoholism, and arrogance, all of which serve to defend against shame. Via the negative affects, emotions help us to survive danger. And via the positive ones, they help us to have a life worth living. Yet they also cause immense suffering, principally via the one affect of shame. Now, could natural evolution have gone so far awry? No, it didn't. The Mesopotamian tale teaches that the gods deeply embedded shame scripts in our ancestors, in the first humans under their control, through conditions that caused frequent impediments to their positive experiences of life. We can discern several categories of shame-related scripts within the tale. First, unrequited love. We adored the gods. As dependent beings, we longed for them to care for us. Not having love returned impedes the positive feelings one has for the other and for oneself, producing shame. The tablets reveal that between us and the Anunnaki, devotion went only one way. We were slaves, soldiers to be sacrificed, valued solely for our services. Scripts of unworthiness were carved deeply within us. 2, getting sound from somebody, but everybody is muted except me. It could, maybe it's in the system. Maybe there's something weird in the system. Anyway, okay, abandonment. The tales of the deluge were the most captivating of the Mesopotamian sagas and an unparalleled source of shame. Whenever a person recalled how the gods let so many perish, it generated a fresh wave of shame and fear, reinforcing scripts of insignificance. In the devastation of Sumer by nuclear fallout, most of the gods abandoned their cities, adding to the survivors' misery. And 1,000 years later, the few remaining ones abandoned humanity entirely. 3, inadequacy. We were small, ignorant, and unskilled compared with the gods. And as a result, we developed negative self-concept scripts. Murals from Mesopotamia and Egypt, too, depict humans, small, naked, bowing, carrying food to the great enthroned ones. Stark images of the realities of human life. 4, enslavement. Slavery severely interferes with the positive experience of life. The shame it causes is powerful. Among the scripts it established in us are ones of hopelessness, entrapment, and impotence. Finally, mortality. Being alive tends to generate positive affect. We live with a baseline level of bodily enjoyment and are drawn to things that stir our interest, unless circumstances stand in the way. The very presence of the Anunnaki stood in the way of enjoyment and interest, generating shame. The reality of death at the end of a short life hit us whenever we thought about or encountered our gods. Contact with those whose lifetimes spanned tens of thousands of years sharply interfered with our pleasure in living. The fear and dread of dying that plague so many people are largely the products of scripts resulting from living with the gods. The most popular epic in Mesopotamia was that of Gilgamesh, the king who tried to reach the planet of the lofty ones, where he hoped to petition for the long life they enjoyed. The epic was translated and copied repeatedly, for it spoke to the pain felt by every human who lived in the presence of seemingly immortal gods. Now I'm going to jump to page 304. This is a bit of a repeat, but for the emotions to best serve the cause of survival, I'm in the second paragraph. The positive affects need to be shut down quickly when no longer warranted. The affect of shame probably evolved to do just that. It's an auxiliary affect, activated only if a positive affect is suddenly impeded, despite a wish for it to continue. Shame's aversive feelings end one's pleasant sensations, emotions, and cognitions swiftly and decisively. By doing so, the affect of shame, also often in tandem with fear, allows a faster response to a potential threat. When shame is experienced in more than minimal intensity, its feelings are markedly unpleasant. They include generalized malaise, a sense of collapsing or cringing, a deep stab of pain, loss of muscle tone, and a dulling of vision. Still, the experience would be forgotten if felt only briefly. In animals and well cared for young children, the state quickly fades because no script is involved. It's uncommon in our culture, though, for anyone past early childhood to have shame activated without a negative script being recruited. The emotions that can be generated while shame is activated are as varied as the types of scripts that what the affect can be linked with. I won't go over the list again. Affects are contagious, transmitted through eyes, facial expression, tone of voice, skin color, and the bioenergetic field. This has survival value when an external challenge is involved. But when shame is triggered by a negative script that's not fully justified by circumstances, it broadcasts an affective state unwarranted by reality. Society's woes are to a great extent the result of shared toxic scripts that cause shame to be magnified and disseminated through emotions and moods. As far as transmission goes, it's a multi-layered thing, and that's why it's so effective. That you have cultural norms that are passed on through generation to generation, particularly in societies that are even more shame-based than ours, like in Japan or China, and in stories and myths that encapsulate the shame-based scripts about ourselves. And of course, in shame-inducing behavior from parent to child. So it creates a very effective chain of multi-level transmissions through the generations. Now, we have 4 basic maneuvers that provide some relief from shame-based emotions. They've become the source of a plethora of troubles. The 4 escapes that I'm going to talk about don't involve positive states. They just feel less bad in the moment than the shame emotions, at least at first. One of them is withdrawal, with which one disengages emotionally and often physically from the person or situation that led to the shame emotion. I don't have to put up with this. I'm not going to have anything to do with him anymore. I'm out of here. Another is avoidance, a mental maneuver with which one evades the importance or even the reality of what just occurred. Who cares? It was no big deal. That didn't happen. A third is attack self, through which one assigns blame to himself, possibly leading to depression. I'm so stupid. I should have known by now. And the fourth is attack other, which involves many forms of hostility and violence. You know, that jerk just cut me off, you know, or those damned immigrants, or whatever. Those behaviors aren't effective escapes from shame, not really. They're cul-de-sacs that a person can enter when he can't identify, tolerate, or find a positive way beyond the shame emotion. Among the four maneuvers of avoidance, withdrawal, attack self, and attack other, people tend to favor one over the other three. Most everybody knows somebody who just likes living in attack other. They're always looking for some excuse to express hostility or manifest hostility towards somebody. Looking for a fight, basically. Although in an especially bad shame episode, one might cycle through all four defenses. Shame emotions and the maneuvers that are used to evade them are the unrecognized generators of much human dysfunction. Withdrawal is a factor in dissociation and sociopathy. You know, I don't care what happens to anybody, you know, doesn't matter. Avoidance is at the root of the addictions, all of which serve to blunt and evade shame emotions. Attack other is a factor in violence, racism, road rage. Attack self is active in masochism and an extreme form in suicide. To more effectively deal with crime and psychopathology, authorities and clinicians need to learn how easily we experience the affect of shame and how automatically we maneuver to escape the shame emotions via the four defenses against them. Now, we can use this theoretical orientation to illustrate an important piece of our communal history. I'm going to jump to, next page, 306. Okay. Let's apply what we just discussed, okay, to the development of the religions of the Greeks and the Hebrews after the departure of the lofty ones. To review, impediments to interest and enjoyment can produce shame-based emotions, and defend against them. We're habituated to engage in one or more of these four attitudes: attack other, attack self, withdrawal, or avoidance. Okay. Now, when Earth was ruled by the Anunnaki, they were the source of interest and enjoyment for the human worshipers. I mean, they were our teachers, guides, our lords, our makers. They were the original celebrities. Yet, the realities of humanity's subjugation repeatedly interfered with those positive states, resulting in countless experiences of shame-based emotions, producing scripts of weakness, inferiority, and dependence, making those emotions prevalent and helping to create the human condition. When the gods left, the positive feelings for them were interrupted in yet another way, a new category of shame emotions linked to scripts of abandonment. To ward off the shame emotions, particularly related to abandonment by the gods, the Greeks turned primarily to the defense of avoidance. The religion they developed held that a pantheon continued to oversee humankind. It was simply that knowing about the deities had become more challenging. In Mesopotamia, the people had witnessed the lofty ones in magnificent ceremonies, and when the living gods were in residence, the populace knew that their gods were being privately tended to by priests and royals. After Sumer was devastated, almost all the gods disappeared, and by the middle of the 6th century BCE, they were no more to be seen or heard. The Greeks chose a path that involved avoiding and denying a painful, humiliating reality. The unstated assumption of their religion was that it was unnecessary for their deities to be physically present. With oracles, rituals, divination, heavenly signs, prayers, and sacrifices, contact with the gods could be maintained. From that point of view, humanity had suffered no loss. Nothing bad had happened. Avoidance let Greeks hide from the shame of humanity's abandonment by the lofty ones. It left them anxious, though, because they had no, oh, hi, Joe. They had no clear way that like the Mesopotamians had, to know that the gods were pleased with their attention to them. So there's this constant sense of anxiety throughout the Greek literature, and also the Romans, like always having to, did it please the gods? We have to let it please the gods. They didn't know whether they were pleasing the gods or not, you know. Anyway, but that's what that was their aim. The Hebrews used a combination of withdrawal and attack other to ward off their shame-based feelings. First, withdrawal. It involved dismissing the gods as if they'd never been real. I mean, that's what you do in any interpersonal withdrawal reaction. Well, you don't count. You don't count. I don't care about you anymore. Priests and prophets preached that the Anunnaki didn't matter. The Hebrew Bible documents a long, contorted process of pulling away from the lofty ones, an extended effort at withdrawal, anchored by the first commandment, thou shalt not have any gods before me. While its authors preserved much of the literary heritage of Mesopotamia, they did so in a way that removed the Anunnaki from the narrative, leaving only traces that we can discern by peering through the screen of Jewish theology. A person in withdrawal from someone with whom they've had a shame-inducing reaction may think something like, I'm not going to have anything to do with them anymore. That's how the Jewish people were told to deal with the gods. Their ancestors had loved. Forget about them. The Jews also used exclusive practices, such as dietary laws, to enact withdrawal from the wider world, which was still devoted to those gods. Jewish withdrawal was most pronounced in the communities of ascetics who lived apart from everyone who was to them insufficiently devoted to the one. The Bible also resonates with the Jews' attack other behavior. So they use that defense against shame also. Their endless religious and military conflicts with the cultures with whom they came in contact, all of whom continued to worship the older gods, fills the Hebrew Bible. The prime source of the hostility towards the Hebrews in antiquity, which even before the advent of Christianity and Islam was considerable, was the Jews' denigration of the religious beliefs of everyone else. The shame produced by the abandonment of the gods quickly dissolved in those Jews who acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah. They could dispense with the defenses of withdrawal and attack other, just as Jesus' Greek followers could dispense with the defense of avoidance. No longer suffering a painful abandonment, they enjoyed a saving embrace. As we mentioned, severe shame can recruit all four defensive attitudes in succession. And it did for the Jews in the tumultuous times before and after the life of Jesus. We just talked about withdrawal and attack other. The Jewish ascetics utilized attack self with their restrictive lifestyles, their extreme sects, even practicing self-flagellation. The worst manifestation of attack self occurred in the mass suicide of the Essenes, as Roman legions were about to deprive them of the withdrawal in which they were living at Masada. And they couldn't imagine enduring the inescapable shame of slavery. In the practices of the Sadducees, the priests on the Temple Mount, the defense of avoidance operated through their replication of Mesopotamian traditions. It looked for all the world, I mean, to the outside objective observer, as if nothing had changed. As in Sumer, there were hereditary priests supported by the populace. And the Bible is replete with how the priests and how the secondary supporters of the temple, the Levites, were to be supported by the populace. Elaborate ceremonies, a sanctified precinct, and a rich tapestry, rich treasury. The priests' practices paralleled what their nomadic ancestors had left behind in Mesopotamia. And the prophets would have been very happy for them to continue to maintain. They could well have done without the priests. While their ideation, the priests' ideation, separated them from the religion of the past, because their God was the God of the universe, not the God of the city. And he was the only deity, not just one of many. But still, their actions replicated the form of Sumerian devotion to the olden gods. Much as the priests of Mesopotamia had roasted meats for their gods to eat, the priests of Jerusalem offered the smoke of burnt sacrifices to their God. The words were quite different. The aromas were much the same. And so through adaptation, they manifested a nothing really has changed. The adaptation was, well, if you have a flesh and blood God who gets hungry, you give him roast beef, okay? If you have a non-incarnate deity, well, you give him the smoke of burnt beef, you know? You just adapted an attitude to a new reality, but denying by your behavior that anything had really changed. Okay, last planned piece of reading. 279 in the section What Now? How can the Mesopotamian tale aid in tackling the problem of excessive, persistent shame? Learning to identify and manage shame, the neural reflex, is central to the healing processes that we've been discussing when poorly handled, shame leads to many dysfunctional feelings and behavior, rage, vengeance, honor killing, suicide, addictions, arrogance, greed, machismo, vanity surgery, massive bodybuilding, bullying, bragging, gambling, and overspending. All of these have their ultimate source in shame. They function as defenses when its feelings become unbearable, which they easily become. They do their job so well that the shame they cover is often difficult to identify. As a consequence, the mental health and legal professions rarely grasp that shame is at the root of much psychopathology and criminality. Many professionals further are limited by blindness for their own shame emotions, and to prevent their personal feelings from being evoked, they insulate themselves against appreciating shame felt by the people they encounter in their work. Poets, novelists, playwrights, and filmmakers, often more adept at dealing with their inner selves than lawyers and therapists. Sadly, that's true about so many therapists. They offer countless illustrations of how shame contributes to the human condition. Shame's transient neuronal response became linked with scripts of inferiority, inadequacy, and dependency in antiquity, keeping the lofty ones and kings securely dominant. Those scripts, embedded in the collective unconscious, make us feel shame more strongly and keep us caught in it longer than we would if we'd had a kinder early existence. Better management of shame is important, complex, and challenging. We don't see shame as a beneficial evolved response because the pain it can generate is much more obvious than its benefits. Rational management of shame becomes a less daunting task when we learn that it's an evolved reflex with great survival value, and that through no fault of our own, we are prone to feel it with an intensity that's unnatural and injurious. So we've all got our work to do in managing our day-to-day shame emotions. The Mesopotamian tale can be a strong support for the learning that's needed to better deal with these feelings. Now I'll take a break here for anything that is stirring, because I next want to get into the manifestations in recent history and current events. If anybody wants to jump in with something, please do. Otherwise, we'll go on.
I'll just support your statement there, Mike, and say that we're fortunate that story itself can be such a powerful therapy, because what you're alluding to is so pervasive. It's worldwide, the issues that you're tackling with this approach, that it's we're fortunate to have something. Therapists understand to a degree, but I think, like you said, sometimes the filmmakers are the ones that can actually affect more people more deeply by a well-told story that affects people on a very subconscious level, and it cuts across all the different cultures and times.
Yes, yes, something we have in mind. Some of you may know that Joe and I are working towards a movie based on evolution. Let me clarify something, because it's easy to get tangled with this. We talked about attack other, the defense against feeling shame by blaming somebody else, seeing the source of the problem in somebody else, manifesting as anger or as rage. It's worth differentiating different sources of the same quality of emotion, because you can have anger that comes out of a growing irritability that results simply from too long an experience in the affect of distress. If you're feeling distress emotionally or physically, for too long a time, you can get pretty grouchy, and react to something, to somebody with a lot of anger, and that's not necessarily based in that much in shame. Another is when you've actually had a real threat or a boundary violation. You can get angry as a totally appropriate defensive response. So those are different than attack other, coming as a way to avoid a feeling of shame, which has come about because interest or enjoyment has been impeded. And again, it can be impeded either by an event in the present or by the intrusion of a script from the past that somehow got triggered, or both. Okay, little clarification, because I didn't want to make it seem like all hostility comes out of defense against shame. All right. There's no talking about shame these days without getting away from Donald Trump. Now, it's been observed that there's a man who knows no shame, and look at the danger, when someone operates, totally unrestrained by the shame that operates in most people. Well, the truth is that he's exquisitely sensitive to shame and massively defended against it. Made so by his son of a bitch father. And because he's so sensitive to it, he's really astute at sensing shame in others, and that's how he recruits his followers, because these are the people, whose circumstances, downward mobility, or awareness of cultural elite that does not value their status in life. These are people who are living in shame. And so he helps them escape it. He says, be like me, have no shame, you don't need to be ashamed, and also attack those sons of bitches, and so he has a great nose for people who are dominated by shame, and shows them, how they can escape its pain. And clearly in our country at this point in our history, he's got quite a pool of candidates for his movement. And by the way, he knows, being a shame master, he knows how to induce it in others. That's why he has so much effectiveness by putting everybody down, everybody and everything. And now another manifestation is these horrible examples of people dying from COVID with their beliefs intact. That it's not a problem. I mean, that's not why I'm dying. I just have pneumonia. Or the mask wouldn't have helped me, or the vaccine wouldn't have helped me anyway. It's unbelievable almost that someone cannot tolerate the shame of acknowledging that they were wrong, misled. Another way of thinking about that is the shame of having the pleasure, the enjoyment of their belief broken, by having to give up the belief. So instead of giving up the belief, they'll die. Here's a recent piece by David Brooks from 3 days ago in the Times, talking about people so enraged by a lack of respect that they're willing to risk death by COVID if they get to stick a middle finger in the air against those who they think look down on them. They're willing to torch our institutions because they are so resentful against the people who run them, and are making them feel shame. And by the way, he points out that the Democratic spending bills are in a real tangible way. They would redistribute dignity back downwards, reducing the vulnerability to shame. That's how they would work. And that's what Joe Biden understands. That's the way to diffuse the bomb. From history, I'll go back, being a war baby. I'll go back to the Second World War, and in the Pacific War, our forces were just astounded by the ferocity of the Japanese soldiers. Well, they were serving their God. They were serving their God Emperor. And to disappoint him by being defeated or being captured was inconceivable. They preferred death. So they went to the extreme of attack other with their banzai charges, and attack self by refusing to surrender and being killed, all to avoid the shame of embarrassing and failing of the God Emperor. Now Hitler, like Trump, he came to power by offering the populace a compensation for the shame that they were experiencing culturally, for the defeat in World War I, for the poverty that they were experiencing in the 1920s. And also there was the Germans, maybe not as extreme as the Japanese, but their culture was largely ruled by shame. You must not step out of line. You must not do the incorrect thing. You must not shame the family, etc. So they were culturally ripe for it, and then environmentally it was magnified. So they were a larger pool, even proportionally, a larger pool even than Trump has had for recruits, and the enjoyment, the joy of following the leader was unbelievably powerful, and one of the most insane demonstrations of the avoidance of the shame that would accompany the loss of the enjoyment of being a follower was in what we read from the diaries of what went on in Hitler's bunker, where the generals were quite aware that the man was totally, at that point, was more insane than he'd been all along. He was completely out of his mind, you know, and they could not fail to obey his orders. It was inconceivable that they could back away from the deep investment they had in being the followers of the great leader. The examples in current, life are all over the place, and I'm sure they come to mind. One well, we'll get into. One was going to talk about the evangelicals and the fundamentalists, but maybe we'll get into them later.
Well, but this really does. I mean, Trump does this perfectly, doesn't he? I mean, he has triggered that kind of rebellion against shame that is causing people to misbehave so terribly everywhere, don't you think?
Yeah.
And it's so unproductive, but it is exactly what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and yeah.
Are you gonna tell us how we get out of this? The cure, the fix?
Oh, at the political level?
No, at the psychological, psycho-spiritual level, of course.
Well, speaking from experience, it ain't easy.
That wasn't the question. I mean, this is something that it strikes me is because it occurs at a cultural level. I mean, we can all identify with shame individually, but this is even deeper and broader. And it seems like the healing requires communal activity. This requires ceremony. And I mean, I just have that feeling that healing from this needs to be a communal effort.
There are communal efforts going on, and I think that healing, I think we could have some help from the media in broadcasting this, some of the positive stories, more than just briefly, but singing them again and again and again.
There certainly is that, yes.
Yeah. There's a story today about how the descendants of Vietnamese immigrants are organizing around the country, a number of cities, okay, setting up organizations to support the Afghan refugees and
Nice.
and get them started integrating into and they say, like, we know what you're going through. We've been there. We're going to help you. Okay. Now that was a story that appeared today, and it's going to disappear.
Yeah.
Okay. But wouldn't that be, something that gets echoed on? Wouldn't that be good to be echoed on Facebook? And
well, one thing that I'm seeing, and I don't know if this is related or not, it's just there's this kind of reinvigoration of everybody around me around it's politics, but it's the politics of the the fundamentals. I've been giving hour-long talks on gerrymandering. I mean, it's this, we need to do better, which is what I see arising right now. And maybe this is something that comes up every now and then as an effort to heal just this stuff, because I'm ashamed of my government, frankly, and the way it's functioning right now. So I'm finding myself, I just can't help but take action to try to do something about it. Is that anything like what you're talking about?
Yeah. Now, one of the things about, now it's true that things are worse now than they've been recently or in recent decades.
Seems like it.
Um, and yet, one of the things causing us so much distress and shame, is that we're coming out of an enjoyment of an illusion that things have been okay.
Ah,
We're having to give up the pleasure of that belief that this country's been, it's good, it's a good place, while all of this crap that we're seeing now, all of this hatred, it's been under the surface,
gotcha.
it's been around. So,
Okay.
we have to deal with this, disillusionment, and it's painful to get disillusioned.
Yeah. It's painful to I always thought that other countries were corrupt, but not mine. I mean, I really believe that.
That's it.
And there's a shame associated with feeling like I've been, hornswoggled and.
Right. Very much. Yeah. I remember there was a candidate. I don't know whether he got elected or not, but he was a candidate for I'm not sure what office. I think Congress in West Virginia, of all places, and he'd been deployed in Iraq, and he talked to people who idealized the American way, and he felt he was representing the American way, and it was this wonderful system. But then he came back, and he took a good look at where he was living, and he said, "This is all bullshit. That's not what's going on here." And so he decided to run for Congress. But we've been living in something of an illusion. What do we do about it? One of the things, and this works directly against the attack other defense, and that is listen to other. Especially those we really disagree with. Just sit down. All right, tell me your story, and I'll shut up, and I won't jump over I'll jump on you for every bit of misinformation that you've gotten, every false belief. I'll let you have your say, and then I want you to hear mine. That kind of conversation has been pretty much lost.
I have to say, I thought the Congresswomen this week telling the stories of their own abortions made a huge impression on me. I mean, it seemed to me that just what they did took abortion somewhat more out of the range of shame. Did you see those conversations?
I saw. I read a couple of them. Yeah.
So one thing we can do is bring that which we have hidden and kept secret out into the public domain, fewer secrets. And that's certainly happening now on a worldwide scale, at least on a cultural scale for us. It seems like a little revelation going on just about every day. I mean, look at how many great people guys have fallen because of sexual improprieties in the last couple of years. That didn't used to happen. I mean, that the things that have been the things that have been hidden by shame are coming out and being revealed, it seems to me, at a higher than normal rate.
Right. The women are coming out of the attack self mode.
Right. And they are coming together, because one woman saying it doesn't have much of an impact, but half a dozen women, and now something is starting to move forward. So again, my sense is this is going to be a communal activity.
Conversation, interaction, something that Facebook was supposed to, foster in a positive way, supposed to, has to happen through other channels. But yes, conversation. I think maybe last time I said something about a book that I recently read about how the American system got to work through unending conversation at all levels of society, starting at about 1740. Everybody was talking about how we should live, what we should do at the political level and also at the spiritual level. So there was constant conversations in courts and legislatures and pamphlets and books, and taverns, and there was also the Great Awakening through the non-denominational, non-sectarian preachers who were traveling across the land. And that went on for decades. That's pretty much been well, lost is maybe too strong a term, but it ain't happening. Anyway, how do we get out of it?
So I gather from what you've written, some of what you've written, that you believe that the first step in healing is to acknowledge this truth of our history. Is that not true?
Yes, because that gets that begins to to undo some very nasty scripts that make us prone to shame. In other words, the idea that there's through our own willfulness or whatever, it's all our fault. We're a fallen species and we did it to ourselves, and to get away from that into, no, it was done to us and we're carrying those wounds in many, many ways, but we were at the receiving end, of some pretty bad treatment. And of course, it's a bit complicated because we do have some of that inside of us, so it's not totally wrong to say it's our fault, because we also are, descendants of the Anunnaki, but it's mostly done to us. So
what do they say? What do they say about what's special about us? That we have something. Is it free will? Is that what it is? What or what?
who's they? But
the Sumerians and the tablets, and what is it about? Because all right, so the gods were fighting over giving us stuff. Am I right about that? And that we were given what, a soul? what, help me
Well,
articulate what I'm thinking about here.
we were given aspects of their essence.
Right, right. Then maybe we may even be better at managing those aspects than they are, given that they seem to be pretty stagnant as a species.
Yes, completely.
They
As a-
haven't destroyed
As a
themselves
civilization, that's a civilization.
as a civilization, right? Right, but they haven't destroyed themselves, so I got to give them credit for that. Since we're seem to be hell bent to do that ourselves.
I saw a movie recently that I recommend. If I have, I recommend it, I have to remember the name. City of Angels.
Oh, I've seen that.
Okay. And in it, there's a character who is talking to an angel. And he was an angel and he decided to incarnate.
Hmm.
So he's able to see this angel, nobody else can, anyway, they're having this conversation in a diner. And what he says is that what we've got, both, as angels and as incarnated spirits, is free will. That's the magic sauce.
And do the Anunnaki have free will as well?
I would think so.
It's hard to imagine they do not. So that it seemed to me that might be part of what they gave us. That might have been part of the conflict between them, that we had been too favored.
That Homo erectus, that the human line, the Homo line, hadn't quite found yet. That's interesting. I mean, but I mean, there are glimmers of free will in the great apes. They've been known to pull pranks, tell jokes. But of course, that's in captivity. So, we don't know what kind of exchange has gone on there, at the level of the field.
You mean that might just be monkey see, monkey do? I thought that was pretty good, actually.
Gorilla, well, more like gorilla see, gorilla do.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. Hard to know, but it could be that there was the beginnings of free will, in the great apes, and it got another layer of it, another component from the Anunnaki genetics. But I mean, that's at the core of that confidence in having free will. That's at the core of your a statement like you made, like we can do better.
Yes,
we can do better.
We can do better. I have to believe that.
Well, no, you don't, but you choose to.
Yes, I choose to. I choose to. I'm not sure exactly what free will is, but I do have a sense of, kind of how things, I watch my cat a lot. I don't think my cat has free will in the same way that I do. And it's almost like I watch him, it's like I see him doing little subroutines, but he doesn't get out of his subroutine and do something entirely different.
Hey, Isaac Bashevis Singer said about free will. He says, we have to believe in free will. We have no choice.
Right. That's good.
We have no choice.
That's good. That's good.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, when you're caught in shame, I think you're not in touch at all with free will, with your free will. You're deflated, and then you're trying to protect yourself against that sense of dying and powerlessness, and you know, you're trying to come out of it somehow, but it's rather automatic. And when you see people operating, you know, in avoidance, therefore addiction, you know, in attack self, you know, deeply depressed, you know, they've lost access to free will.
Well, among other things, they're not acting in their own interests and things like that. Do you think, because this is something I've sort of been running around in my head for a while, that the whole shame thing was set up in us on purpose
Yes.
by the Anunnaki to keep us in control? So you do think that?
Absolutely.
Okay, because that's kind of how it seems.
It cemented their rule. Made us much more malleable.
It works.
It works.
Shit works.
Hmm.
Bite.
Now, rebellion has aspects of, can have aspects, the destructive aspects of rebellion, you know, comes out of, is founded in attack other, but it's also an escape from the trap of shame.
Mm-hmm. Sort of like scaling the congressional walls.
Well,
Those people were deeply deluded.
That was pure attack other. That was pure attack other.
Okay.
But
there was still a kind of mental delusion going on, a separation from reality that seemed to me, when you listen to people's stories, what they thought was going on and what was really going on were not the same.
well, they bought into a new delusional reality.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So they were completely in concert with reality as they saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, of course, that's still going on.
But it was still, and terribly mistaken. It was a reaction to shame. I mean, these are people that are convinced that their problems are somebody else's fault too.
Right. I mean, you didn't see too many highly accomplished people in that crowd.
No, although I did read an article, and I don't really know what this means, but I understand that the diagnosis of mental illness in the population is something like 19-20%. And in the population that was arrested so far, the 400 or so, that number of previous diagnoses of mental illness was in the 60-something% range. I don't know what it means. I really don't. One possibility is that they were trying to get those diagnoses so that they could get off. But I don't think that's the entire story.
I don't, don't know where that goes.
I don't either, but
Where that
I thought this was very interesting. Anyway, sorry.
Um, But the defense against shame of withdrawal plays in there. It wasn't purely attack other, it's withdrawal from reality, you know, into an alternative reality.
In which you're on top.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're saying that this is all of this is shame triggered stuff. This is all the same mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, in a way you say, well, you just got one string here on your violin, you know, and you're trying to interpret everything as a manifestation of shame. Not exactly true, but it does run through in all sorts of ways. The elite, you know, my understanding of what motivates the elite to suppress the hoi polloi and the unempowered, you know, it is their potential shame from having within themselves the consciousness of a lowly slave, the original human consciousness, and they don't want, you know, they don't want their esteemed status, they don't want their power, or they don't want their riches, or they don't want their intellectual accomplishment, you know, to be challenged at all, threatened at all, you know, by a consciousness within of a lowly slave, you know. And so they defend against that potential shame by cementing their power, you know. Of course, then inducing shame in the real world in the unempowered.
It also, it's sort of the flip side of that, says to me they're afraid of us.
They're afraid of it. Yes.
Of us and what we can do. And so it makes, doesn't it make it more worthwhile to figure out what we can do?
Which we? Who's afraid of which we?
That Anunnaki are afraid, and the elite are afraid of us, the rest of us.
The elite are afraid of the masses, just like in their view of themselves, they're afraid of the slave within. They're afraid of the slave revolt from inside.
Not necessarily consciously?
Not consciously.
Okay, all right.
Were the Anunnaki afraid of the mass of humankind? Well, you know, they did, I don't know about afraid, but they did begin to lose their grip. You know, the human kings, the demigods, you know, began to gain power and authority, you know, at the expense of the gods. That's not terribly well, it's not terribly explicit, because the gods still ruled the scribes and the priests, and they recorded the history, you know. But it's clear that humanity was beginning to lose its total reverence for the Anunnaki lords.
I didn't catch that.
Oh yeah, towards the end.
Towards the end.
Towards the end, as a matter of fact, there was there was a time when towards Marduk was seized and held captive for a while. So here was a god with, the chief god of on earth at the time, because he, was the only remaining big deal. And he didn't have his destructive weapon, and he didn't have any allies with him. It's not it looks like they were beginning to lose their grip before they got totally demoralized when they unintentionally destroyed central and southern Sumer, Mesopotamia.
Unintentionally?
When they bombed the 5 cities and the spaceport and the Sinai, and the fallout destroyed everything that they had created in central and southern Mesopotamia. I think that was unintentional, yeah. Particularly from the way they fled. All of the laments, sound like, wow, this was not what they had in mind.
And are they responsible for one or both of the events that began and ended the Younger Dryas? I'm kind of trying to fit that in with this story, and it never quite fits. Back 10, 12,000 years ago?
I don't know. There's no reflection in the tablets, except very indirectly. No, actually, there's no reflection in the tablets, which are all about Mesopotamia, of the Younger Dryas event, of the passage of Nibiru event and the great tsunamis. Yes, that's.
Well, that was one, I think that was either the beginning or the end of the Younger Dryas, I think. Is that right? It was like 10,000 years ago, 12, 11,000.
They're probably, the 2 floods are probably not that far apart in time. A few thousand years here or there.
Well, yeah, the Younger Dryas is like 1,200 years on either side.
Yeah.
So
So either that was before or after the close pass of Nibiru.
but they didn't. I thought they destroyed us once. Am I getting that wrong already? I'm still having a hard time remembering all the details of the story.
What? Okay. The tablets are very clear that Enlil, for quite a while, wanted to destroy humanity.
Right.
He'd had it, and he was not successful, partly because Enki had foiled his attempts, and he was happy to learn that through a close pass of Nibiru, there was going to be a flood. And
Okay.
his contribution to destruction was getting the nobles to swear an oath not to reveal to civilized humanity that there was this flood impending, So
Okay.
the cities were not informed. So civilized
That's it.
humanity in Mesopotamia and Egypt, got flooded. Egypt not so bad, because if you look at the geography, the water coming into Egypt was in a different way. It was a more gradual flood. If we're talking about the water coming into the Mediterranean through Gibraltar, anyway, but it wasn't flooded in the same way that Mesopotamia was, with a huge surge up the Gulf of water and mud. So they, and of course that would only destroy civilized humankind. The humans that had distributed around the earth were of no consequence to the Anunnaki lords, and so they don't even figure in the story.
So they didn't didn't directly throw the comet at us. They just didn't warn us that it was coming, so we were destroyed by it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But Enki knew about it, so he encouraged one of his followers to build a submarine and to fill it with the seeds of life, genetic material, which is exactly that's also in the Vedic literature. That
Yeah.
the seeds of life were preserved in the flood.
Neat.
It's-
Shame is hard to talk about.
Well, one of the things that it does is it induces shame just to talk about it.
Just talking about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to talk about.
Yeah. But it feels so deliberate. And it feels like when I look inside myself, I feel like I see these subroutines that have been implanted in there.
And those are all updates from your particular family story,
Sure.
family of origin, so they've gotten personalized and particularized, but they're really your own particular family and cultural versions of the shame-enhancing scripts that were embedded at the start.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're inadequate, you're stupid, you're weak, you're dependent, all of that. Okay. And you need us. Okay. All of
Yeah.
that.
I still don't understand worshiping these guys. They got to have given us something that made it worthwhile. I don't quite understand worshiping a God that doesn't do anything for you.
Well, he has something of a head start with you because he made you.
Well, how would I know that?
Because they don't.
Well, they would tell me that, but I mean.
And you could see that you look more like him than an ape. You could see.
Right.
You could see it, even though you were a lesser version.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there has to be more to it than that, though. There may be something that's got to involve a deep felt sense of something. Is where I'm getting at. Like in their presence, you are filled with awe. That I could buy. So there's still more to the story that hasn't quite settled in.
Why we're in such awe, why we were and still are so enthralled with them. Okay.
Well, I think it was real. Whatever they presented to us, it wasn't a piece of bread and a drop of wine. It was something that impressed us. and that the sacraments of current religions emulate, but only right.
Somehow they felt like everything to us.
Mm-hmm.
They felt like everything. I mean, we were so grateful that they paid attention to us. We were grateful to be their slaves. How wonderful to serve them in battle.
That doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. There's got to be another piece in there somewhere.
to be continued,
Yes.
okay?
Okay.
Because the part of you that says, the hell with that, you know, like, I'm out of here.
Right.
I don't buy that at all. That's easy to understand. The part that's harder to understand is, I buy that. You know, I'm glad to be here. You know, it's like I don't know. There's something.
Well, and we think,
There's something good and noble that they capture in us, and got us to, you know, accept the subservient role, the subservient indebted role, whatever that was, to be continued.
okay, and I'm still going with felt sense.
Okay, thank you. So Jim had to leave and Delia left and
And it's late and I'm tired.
Bill left and we're after 8 o'clock. So, so thanks to them.
Reeve Robin is still here.
Oh, Reeve is still there. Okay, then. I see. Oh, yes, I see. Okay, well, thank you for joining together. This really is a great treat for me, monthly, and
Treat to all of us, to be truthful.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's just definitely part of my thinking these days.
And I can't reveal to you how it's moving along, but I can say that with all fingers crossed, you know, the cinema project is proceeding.
Excellent.
That's very good.
Okay. Good night, all. Good night.
Good night.